the honor to speak about my Rebbe. It's a little bit strange. When I heard the news that he was nifter earlier this week, I was really very shaken up in a way which surprised me, because I was close to him from approximately my ages 18 to 22, 23 maybe. It was over 10 years ago that I really had last seen him. And I didn't really appreciate the impact he had on my life. But let me just, by show of hands, before this week, how many of you had heard of Aharon Lichtenstein? Okay, so about a quarter of you maybe. How many of you had ever read anything that he wrote? Okay, so just even fewer of you. And really the question is, it's a question that reached me a lot when I was a teenager. Why should I devote my effort, devote my energy to hear, to read, to study the work of somebody who I never knew? And don't get me wrong, he is a great scholar, he was a great Rebbe. There are others. Baruch Hashem, our generation is not completely orphaned. We have, still alive today, great progenitors of Torah U'Madda. We have Rabbi Norman Lamb in New York, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who's also now in New York. We have people of my generation, Rameir Soloveitchik. If you want to learn, if you want to study, there are people to study from. Why Aharon Lichtenstein? You know, when I was in high school, we used to talk about how we were being force-fed things from dead white males. I don't know if that's still the lingo. But you have the same problem in high school. You know, why Wordsworth and not Coleridge? Why Darwin and not Gould, or Gould and not Darwin? So let me back up a little bit. Lichtenstein used to tell us, he used to speak about his own Rebbe's quite a bit. One of the Rebbeim that he spoke about most often was Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And again, a show of hands. Who has heard the name Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach? So about the same quarter of you have heard about Lichtenstein. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach died in 1995. He was the posek of the generation in Eretz Yisrael. He was the main authority that we still have to this day, 20 years later, on the laws of Shabbos and the laws of medical halacha. He didn't report these things himself. He was not a political person. He did not publish a lot in his own name. But his students disseminated his teaching, disseminated his work. And when Lichtenstein went to Israel in 1971, and again, this is Lichtenstein, who spent his childhood learning from great rabbis, Rav Hutner, Rav Aharon Soloveitchik, or Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, his son-in-law of Yosef Soloveitchik. He made a point to become close to Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. This is a man who was a Rosh Yeshiva in his own right. He didn't need another Rebbe. He made a point to make himself a Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael. And what he used to say about Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was that this is a man who, if he were not a Talmid Chacham, he would be, and it's hard to imagine this, but he said if he were not a Talmid Chacham, he'd be the nicest man in Yerushalayim. And that's what drew people to Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And the reason he said that, and the Rebbeim, when they told us about what he used to say about Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, they would say, and we were all chuckling when we heard that, because he was saying the same things that could be said about himself. That if he were not a Talmid Chacham, he would be the nicest man in Yerushalayim. It's hard for me to, let me tell two stories. One about Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, another one about Lichtenstein. This story about Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was told to me by Rameir Goldvich at YU. Goldvich, his family is also close to Rav Auerbach. And he told a story about he had a student in his class, a Baal Tshuva, from Israel. And the student, Rav Goldvich was telling stories about Rosh Shlomo Zalman, and the student says, Rosh Shlomo Zalman? I know Rosh Shlomo Zalman. And how do you know Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach? He's a young man, he's a Baal Tshuva, never really had a chance to learn in a serious way. This is the story that this young man told me. It made such an impression on me. He said that during Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's funeral, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's funeral had about 250,000 people in it, walking down the streets of Yerushalayim. It was the biggest funeral in Israel at the time, since surpassed by the funeral of Rav Ovadia Yosef. During Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's funeral, there was a sea of people walking from the Mea Shearim neighborhood, from the neighborhood, he wasn't actually in that neighborhood, but from the neighborhoods of the center of Yerushalayim to the cemetery. Thousands and thousands of people. And this young man, he had an interview. He was going to study at the Fitzalel Art School in Yerushalayim. And he was struggling to get from the central bus station to the art school against the sea of people. Until he realized, wait a second, all these people are going this way, and I'm going that way? So he turned around to join the funeral. Never went to the art school, learned who Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was, eventually came to YU to study for Goldberg. Here's the second story, which I saw this week. I'm sure you remember last year, the three boys who were killed at Kiddush Hashem. And their funerals, because of the way the search played out, where the whole country got involved in it, their funerals became kind of political affairs. You know, everybody wanted to show up at the funerals. Again, thousands and thousands of people at the funerals. One of the fathers of one of the boys, Ophir Shar, the father of Gilad, he was a student of the yeshiva of Rav Aharon Lichtenstein. And the story was disseminated this week. Rav Lichtenstein, who went also to the funeral, to be Menachem Avil, and as the funeral was departing and they were going to the cemetery, and all the family was just rushing, it was a hot day, they were just rushing to get out to the cemetery, and out of the corner of his eye, Ophir Shar noticed his Rebbe Lichtenstein at that point was walking on a cane, being supported by his wife and by his daughter, Rabbanit Esti. And he turned around, ran back, past all the Knesset members, past all the politicians, past all everybody who was there just to be there. Saw his Rebbe, gave his Rebbe a big hug, they cried on each other's shoulders. And then he turned back to go to bury his son, leaving his Rebbe just standing there crying. And again, let me say a bit more. Let me say a little bit personally about Lichtenstein, what he meant for me. Because ultimately, stories are stories. Lots of people do lots of great things, as I said. But what prompted me to learn about Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was the stories that Lichtenstein told about him. What prompted me to learn about Rav Soloveitchik was the stories that my Rebbeim told about Rav Soloveitchik. So what can I do but tell stories about what happened to me personally? When I was a high school graduate, I went to Yeshivat Har Etzion because that's where I thought I learned well. From within high school, Baruch Hashem, I got accepted to lots of colleges. I had my choice of various Ivy League schools. I wound up choosing Columbia. When I went to Rav Lichtenstein Shir, one of the first things that he tried to press upon me was the value of being in a Torah environment throughout the formative years of your life, post-high school. And he tried to impress upon me how important it would be for me to continue my studies in a place like Yeshiva University. I'm not trying to push that, and he didn't really try to push that in a general sense. Yeshiva's not like that. But for me personally, he thought it was important. And as I sat in the shir and I sat in the front row, I developed a very close relationship and learning with him. This conversation played out over the course of the year. And so finally I asked him, Rebbe, you went to Harvard. He did. He got a PhD at Harvard in English literature. Why is it okay for you to go to Harvard, and for me it's not okay to go to Columbia? I can't really picture. I'm staying in with a little bit of surprise that I had such chutzpah, but it wasn't, he didn't take it like that at all. And he explained, well, at Harvard I was taken care of. I was able to study by the Rav on the weekends, and others told me that he reduced his learning schedule. He had only 10 hours a day of learning while I was at Harvard. More importantly, he didn't quite say it this way. In grad school, you're already better formed as an adult. And the result of the story was that I chose 2 years after leaving high school, 2 years after visiting all these colleges, to continue my studies at YU, continue my studies with Lichtenstein and his students. When I expressed my relief to him, he quoted some English poet about the relief of resolving uncertainty. But to me, it was a little bit more. It was the feeling that I was drawing myself close to someone who was inspirational in his avodas Hashem, his learning, his integration of Torah and secular knowledge. I want to close with 2 points. First, I brought my selection of the books that Lichtenstein published. Maybe I'll leave them here today. If you want to leave through them, remember Bruce will take them back for me. One point which Lichtenstein really tried to impress upon us, and this was a theme which came out a lot in their Spedim this week. The concept in Pirkei Avos, we say, Batel Ritzono L'Ritzono, of nullifying your will to the will of Kadosh Baruch Hu. He was many things. He was an intellectual, he was a scholar, he was a community leader. But first and foremost, he portrayed himself as a servant of Hashem. And I'll just quote from his, one of his essays here. He says, Judaism is built on the notion of nullifying your will before God. That language from Pirkei Avos, Batel Ritzono L'Ritzono. On defining your existence as being called and commanded, this can be construed in a narrow sense and a broader sense. In a narrow sense, we're bound by many specific mitzvot. Part of the difference between Judaism and general existence is this range of mitzvot. This extent to which the tentacles of commandment enter into the fiber of your being and grip you in every area. Apart from the specific mitzvah which one is given, there is also the overarching concept of living a life of command, a sense suffusing one's entire existence of living in Milton's phrase, quote, as ever my great taskmaster is I, end quote. This is very central to our perception. And then I'll end off with a story that happened with Lichtenstein and one of his daughters, a 13-year-old daughter, which he recounts in his, to the biographer of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I'll just preface the story by saying that one of the great accomplishments of Lichtenstein, and I speak directly, particularly to this side of the room, was the way that he included women in the Torah learning structure of his community. He told us all the time that when his daughter first went to high school, they taught her Tashbach. What's Tashbach? Tashbach is an acronym, Torah Shabbat Pack. They didn't learn Gemara. They didn't learn Chumash in depth. You know, they learned a bunch of photocopied sources, and that's what girls learn. He thought that was so wrong, and he made a point of inculcating in his daughters and teaching his daughters personally Torah on as high a level as the boys. And so he tells the story that when his daughter was 13 years old, she wanted to get her ears pierced. Pretty natural, normal thing, right? And he had some concerns about it. He had some halachic concerns about it. First of all, he didn't like the whole ornamentation thing, and he also wasn't sure whether maybe piercing the ears is inflicting an injury on the body, which one that is not supposed to do. So it didn't happen right away, and they let it sit. And then his daughter said, well, what if we asked for Shlomo Zalman Auerbach? Would you agree if Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said it was okay? Now again, this is the Posek Hador, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Where Lichtenstein said, sure. So they set up an appointment on a Motzei Shabbos, and he took his 13-year-old daughter to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach to discuss whether they could get her ears pierced. So Lichtenstein laid out the whole sugya as he understood it to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shlomo Zalman said, he started to smile, and he said, listen, where I grew up, in the big Yisrael neighborhood in Yerushalayim, it was understood that the boys, when they were born, they got a bris, and the girls, they got their ears pierced. And he went on to explain how the whole thing wasn't a big issue in his mind. And And Lichtenstein recounts how he was so uplifted, so just utterly overwhelmed by that experience. Not because he felt any personal connection to his thought that it could be a problem to previous years, but he was so enthralled by the way that Shlomo Zalman answered this question, this little question about this little hesitation about something silly, and he calls it something silly and small, like piercing ears. He gave it seriously, and he answered this 13-year-old girl in a very serious way. That 13-year-old girl became the head of the Migdal Oz Seminary, Rabbanit Esther Rosenberg. And to me, that story is just emblematic of everything about Lichtenstein. The way that he included girls in the study of Torah, the way he was so frum that everything that we would think was normal, he wanted to ask a shayla from the Posek Hador. And the way that he encouraged everybody to develop those personal relationships. So we don't have Lichtenstein with us anymore. We don't have many of the... Every generation has its own teachers, Dor Dor Dorsha. And all of you are going to find your own teachers. You have wonderful teachers here. You're going to find other teachers as well. And I just encourage you, learn from your teachers. Learn from their teachers. Pay attention to the people that they regarded as important. And use the stories they tell and the teachings they have as an opportunity to learn more about Judaism.